Hey guys, so I guess I'm gonna do a video on ring gap. So piston ring gap, we're working on the 6.7 P-pump engine tonight. I'm just gonna show a video for doing one. Just doesn't, like, it's exactly the same thing for doing all of them. So I'll just do one and then I'll do the other ones off camera, but just wanted to show you guys. And I will go into depth a little bit on the sizing of ring gap, and then I'll do another video later just talking about ring gap. So I'm just talking about this engine tonight, and then I'll go more in depth in ring gap later in another video, just for the guys that aren't, you know, per se doing this, just ring gap in general on diesel engines and gas engines. I'll do a little bit of both. But anyways, let's get after it here. So this is, the rings will come in a box like this, unless you buy a kit. Then it comes in a big box where all the rings are in one box, and then usually they're, if it's like that, lots of times they'll be in bags. So this is what they look like when they come in, you know, individuals, or if you buy them in a rebore kit or something like that. If you buy pistons and the rings are already installed, I still recommend to pull the rings off and check the ring gap, because most of the time they're good for a stock application, but you do get, every once in a while, you'll get one that's funky. So it's a good idea to pull them off and check. So when you're pulling them out of the box here, and yes, I do still use an old style hand ring file for you guys that are looking at it funny. Wipe the bench off a little bit. Still in the phases of cleaning up, so it's still a disaster. So anyways, when you pull everything out of the box here, you can see that they got the paper in between them. So that's how the actually will be the orientation of the rings for guys that don't know. So first ring, top ring, second ring, instructions if you need, oil ring. So actually, let's open up the instructions and I can show you they don't tell you anything. I guess if you read a bunch of different languages, I'm not so much good for that. And I guess it does tell you a little bit of information, but tells you some of the marking information. So I guess maybe read the information. I guess I've done it so many times. For me, it's just you know, common knowledge, I guess you would per se, and it's not maybe common knowledge to everybody. So maybe do read the instructions, because if you put a ring in upside down, you will have a bad day. So talking rings, depending on the piston setup, I'm not going to get into ring design and stuff on this video. So these are the piston rings that come in the rebore kits that I bought for this engine. So they're nothing special, it's just a factory replacement style ring. Now what we're going to do is we're going to check to see what the ring gap is on for number one ring here. And it works the same for all of them. So just for reference, your top ring gaps, now this is factory in a 6.7 Cummins, is between 12 and 18 thou. I want to have it a little bit bigger than that myself, being for what we're doing. So I'm going to go to 22 thou on the top rings. So I always put them in the way that they're supposed to be, which will be designated by mark or a dot. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that in the video or not. There's a little M there. So what I do is you take the ring like so with your gap at the top, push it in, roll it, and then pull it to the top, almost to the top of the bore. Now you can buy all kinds of different things. You can do this with a piston. You can do this all kinds of different ways. This is just, I have this piston sitting here and the other one's over there, but you can, what I do is I take an old piston and cleaned up obviously, and leave the top ring on it. And what I do is I use that for my gauge for pushing it in, as long as you don't cock it sideways like I just did. But that's how I use that. There is proper tools for doing it, so if you're doing it, you can do it like that, but literally you don't, it's not really very hard to do. So, and then all you do is take a feeler gauge, and then that gap that's in there, this is the gap that you're measuring right here. So you need to stick a feeler gauge in there, see what your gap is, And you would basically want no resistance on your feeler gauge. So that feeler gauge is 20 thou, so we need to open this up a little bit. And a little bit more for this application. Doesn't hurt my feelings, so if I end up catching a little bit more, I'm not too worried about it. My piston to wall clearance on this engine, if I remember, I got it written down, but I'm pretty sure it's 8.5 thou is what we're running for piston to wall clearance. There again isn't super crazy. It's more than spec, but it's not super crazy because I still do want to street drive this thing. So now there is a few things for this. So when you're doing when you're ring filing, big thing is that if you look at the edge of this ring, you want to be very careful. You need to keep that edge square. So if you get it in there, you got to keep it square up against your cutter. And you can buy these relatively cheap. They don't have to be super crazy. One day I'll probably buy a real good one, but and then now what you do is you need to take, being that we just ground this, right, or cut this a little bit, what you need to do, and another trick you can do is if you put the ring, push the ring together, it should sit perfectly flat, like with no gap in there. Look up at the light and see whether or not there's a gap. If there's a gap, then you need to straighten it out. You want them straight. So what you need to do is you need to take, I have a stone for doing this, but I haven't, being that we got everything moved around, I haven't found it yet, but a real nice file will do it, or a stone. But you need to take that edge off because there's going to be a sharp edge on that ring where you filed it, and you need to take that off. So you need to get that out of there, and I always file both sides. And if you need to cut a large amount off the ring, I recommend cutting some from both sides, unless the instructions recommend not to do that. So completely up, you know, like just read, it is a good idea to read the instructions. So we got that cleaned up, and literally, like I said, you're just taking that sharp edge off the ring, right? So we'll go back to over here and just rinse and repeat, do the same thing, right? Like I said, I always do it so you get your mark going up. I've always said myself that I was going to take the lathe and make some tools for doing this, and I just never have. One day. The right size feeler gauge, and it fits in there nice. So that is it for that one. So then all you have to do is you do the same thing for your next ring. And then so standard gap on number 2 ring, or the second ring, is 32 to 47. I'm gonna go about 50 on that one, and then my oil ring, your spec on that one is 10 to 23, which usually they're on the high end of spec anyway, but you're going to check them the same way. So when you check those though, is you need to take the spring out, which is actually oil retainer, and so ring there again, mark up. These ones actually, I honestly don't know if it makes a difference. Nah, they're the same both ways, but I always do mark up. Put it in there, bring it to your top. You do want to make sure that you get it square, because you want it square. You get it square. So we're gonna go big spec on oil ring. And it's that big spec anyway. So, and lots of times, like I said, lots of times the oil rings are usually on the bigger spec. So, but you want to make sure you know, the oil ring doesn't really get super hot, but you know, and you do the exact same process. If it's too big or too small, sorry, then you do the same process on the ring file and put it. Now, when you put this back in, something I maybe should show is this is not one piece. And there's the split right there. So you want to put the split in it opposing the gap. So that would be with the gap and opposing the gap. So put it opposing the gap, put it back in, and I'm gonna open, I'm probably gonna maybe open this one up a couple thou. Just, I gotta measure all the other ones and I haven't done all the other ones. I just wanted to put the video out for doing it. So that's for that. So now when you get into high performance stuff, a lot of it has to do, it depends on how hot you want to run it, how much piston to wall clearance you're running, whether you're going to run nitrous or not, the bowl design. There's a lot that goes into it. So it's not like just a one size fits all, in my opinion. But I will get into that a little bit more. Usually we run these on the high end of spec. Even in a factory application, I like the high end of spec, so then if they get hot, they don't break rings. But when you get into a high performance application, it really depends on your piston to wall clearance and all of that stuff. Lots of times, if you're doing this stuff and you're doing high performance and you're doing that, it's best to talk to somebody a little bit about it. But nonetheless, I will do a video on how the manufacturers and the high performance world and all that stuff does it. But it depends on, there's a bunch of factors that are involved in it. So I just wanted to mention there is a bunch of factors involved. Just, it's not a one size fits all for doing it. Same with piston to wall clearance and all that type of stuff. So anyways, if you guys have any questions, comments, hit me down below, and I'll catch you on the next one.